The Bible reading today is from Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 to 9. The Lord had said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I'll curse. All people on earth will be blessed through you." So Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abraham travelled through the land as far as the great site of the tree of Moab at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "To your offspring I will give you this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on towards the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the east and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abraham set out and continued toward the Negev. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was awesome. Toby will be doing Bible reading classes afterwards, if you'd like to join him. Don't worry, it's not me, it's Ben. Ben, can I invite you up? Let me pray for Ben before he gives us a sermon today. Lord, it's just such an honour to be able to have one of my really good friends, Ben, here today. And I know he's brought something that you have shown him. I just thank you for his experience, for Ben and Mel and the girls. I just pray that there are things that we haven't heard before that we can be encouraged with, things that you have given him insight into. I just pray for peace in his heart as he shares and good listening ears for us. Just thank you for this opportunity to hear your word today. And we just pray that you may speak to our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Toby. That was fantastic. You did really well, bud. Yeah. I certainly couldn't have done that at your age. It's really good to be back with you. I was struck by the number of L plates that I saw in the parking lot, and then to see people who used to be in Kingdom Kids come out of their driver's seat. It's good to be back. All right, so we're looking at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 9. Yeah. And we're going to be looking at this as God's calling out of Abram to mission. And you might look at this passage and think, oh, it's kind of an odd passage for mission. But in many ways, this really lays a very solid foundation for us to understand mission in general. To give you some context. Yeah, I'll just keep on moving here. Okay, yeah. All right. Give you some context. So this is Genesis 12. If you just go back a couple verses to chapter 11, verse 27, that's the first time we ever meet Abram or hear of him. And so building up to that point, you start with Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and we see God as the creator who made heaven, who made the earth, and we see him interacting with Adam and Eve and see that personal relationship, that God is a personal God. We see God calling Adam and Eve out to rule over the creation and to fill the world. You hit chapter 3, and we're introduced to sin, and we see God as a holy God who cannot be around sin and punishes sin and has to send Adam and Eve out of the garden. You hit chapter 4, And we meet Cain and Abel, Eve's first two sons. And we see the first death that sin brings about. Chapter 5 is a genealogy. And that genealogy gets you all the way up to Noah and the flood. So chapters 6 through 9, we see another side of God as he seeks out Noah and invites Noah to be part of his plan to rescue the world. You hit chapter 10, and we get the Tower of Babel, introduction of the languages and how that happened, spread out in the world. And then you hit another genealogy in chapter 10 that carries you all the way up to Abram. And so, I'm sorry, chapter 10 was the genealogy, gets you to Babel. Then from Babel is chapter 11, my bad. Yes, anyway, we're all the way up to Abram now. So we've hit 2 genealogies by that point, covering many generations. Now, many years ago, I read the unabridged version of Moby Dick. That's Ahab, the whale, Starbuck, in case you're wondering where the coffee name came from. And he's one of the people in there. It was an incredibly boring book. I understand now why they abridged it. But there's all these really dry chapters. There's even like 3 chapters in a row where they try to explain a better way that they could classify whales. And it's incredibly boring. But what I realized was that the author was giving you a taste of life on that ship and helping you realize life on that ship was not, it's not an action-packed, like Fast and Furious kind of movie of one adventure after another. There's a lot of tedious, boring time. Well, we hit the genealogies of Genesis, and I hope this isn't... Steve's giving me a bad look already. But I think sometimes these genealogies serve a similar purpose. Not of boring us, but of helping us realize that there's this long period where it may feel like God was doing nothing. A long period of generation after generation after generation of another son of Eve being born. And you're wondering, will this be the rescuer that God promised in chapter 3? No, it's not. We're going another generation. Will this one? No, it's not. So all of these genealogies are reminding us that they were still waiting for God's rescue to come. And then we hit chapter 12. And right off, chapter 12, God's voice comes booming onto the scene again to snap us to attention to say, oh, God's active. Let's see what's happening. And God says, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, if you look at that statement that God is making and the command he's giving Abram, it actually echoes the very first command that God ever gave. And that comes from Genesis chapter 1. When God made Adam and Eve, God blessed them, and he said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So from the very beginning, we've seen God's heart, that he wants to include his children, his creation, in the work that he is doing. He's including Adam and Eve in filling the earth and making the rest of the earth as wonderful as the garden that he had put them in. And now in chapter 12, he's including Abram and saying, I want to use you to bless the whole rest of the world. And so the first thing that I want us to remember this morning is that God delights in including us in his work. You see, mission is not our idea. It's not us carrying out some amazing work that we do. Mission isn't even, and you got to listen closely, it's not even God sending us out from where he is to go do something else. Mission is God inviting us to come and join him in the work he's already doing. God has been rescuing his people ever since Genesis chapter 3. Ever since sin entered the world, God was already at work, and he's been active ever since then. So when we serve in mission, we're not even serving as an ambassador that's far away from his king and trying to represent a king from a distant land. No, we are serving alongside our king as he works to rescue his people. So if God delights in including us in his work, what is that work? What did he invite Abram to do? Let's look at verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." So Abram's first task was to leave. And you have to ask, well, where are you going? You know, if you tell a friend, "Oh, I'm going on a short-term mission," I guarantee you the first question they're going to ask is, "Oh, where are you going?" Well, poor Abram had no idea where he was going. God never told him that. Now, when I first moved to China, quite a number of years ago, I hardly spoke any. Well, when I first moved, I spoke no Chinese. But even by the point of this story, I still had very, very little Chinese. And one day, a friend invited me to join him for dinner on the other side of the city. So I found out, okay, I need to take this bus, and it's kind of a circular route. So, okay, I'll take the bus, I'll go on down. Had a great time catching up with him and being there with him. Now, this was 2003, and for people who are younger, you may not realize iPhones did not exist then. The App Store did not exist. Google Maps, I don't think Google Maps existed. If it did, you had to print it off and take it with you. So that's how old I am. I get there, and after dinner, I'm trying to find the bus to get back to the university where I was living. So I knew which bus route I needed, but I wasn't sure which direction on the circle I should be going, and which side of the street to get on. It's a very busy highway. So I think, okay, I'll get on the bus and I'll ask the driver, "Hey, are you going to the university?" So I get on the first bus, I ask him, he said, "Oh, 不是, 不是, 不是. No. Okay, that's fine. Glad I asked. Get off, wait for the huge highway to clear, finally cross, then wait for the next bus to come. It comes, get on that one. I'm like, I'm going to verify and make sure. So I asked that driver, I said, "Are you going to the university?" "Oh, 不是, 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 other side. Oh, my goodness. I'm thinking, okay, I get it. No bus driver wants to be responsible for, some white guy who can't speak Chinese. I tell you what, I'll ask a third party. And so as I'm waiting for this highway to clear, I spot this lady kind of just standing by herself at the bus stop on the other side. She looks like she's probably from the countryside, and I think, oh, that means she'll be more friendly because I'm from more of a country area. I don't trust city people. And yeah, sorry, Mel's giving me a really mean look after that one. No. So I think, okay, I'm practicing in my head how to say, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question? Does the bus to the university come here?" Okay, yeah, it's 请问 is excuse me. Okay, 公交车, yeah, that's bus, okay. Well, I get up to her, and she's standing like right on the curb of this very busy highway. So in order to make eye contact with her, I have to come up right beside her, kind of like lean over, afraid that, a bus is going to clip me. And I look up to her and I say, "Excuse me, 请问." And as soon as I say that, she freaks out. And she goes, "Whoa, no, like backs away from me, keeps like a meter clearance, goes out into this super busy highway to stay away from me, comes over to this other guy, whispering and pointing at me." I'm like, literally all I said was, "Excuse me." I didn't even get to tell you what my question was yet. This guy's freaking out. "Whoa, no, don't do that." I'm thinking, what is wrong with these people? Oh, man. So it's a couple days later before a friend comes into town whose Chinese was much better. I'm like, man, I don't know what's going on. Here's something that happened a couple days ago. I tell him, and he starts dying laughing. He goes, Ben, you got the tone wrong. You're supposed to say Qing Wen, but you use like English intonation. He said, Qing Wen, which is, please kiss me. Yeah. Yeah, turns out I was reinforcing every stereotype of a white guy she had ever heard. So, anyway, back to Abram. Abram also didn't know where he was going. And actually, come to think of it, he had problems with people wanting to kiss his wife. But anyway, let's get back to Abram. The command is to leave. That's all that God told him. Go from your country. Yeah, go from your country, from your father's household, from your tribe. It's a very risky command. Abram was leaving everything. This isn't like moving from Sydney to Melbourne. You know everything's fine in Melbourne as well. I mean, it's not Sydney, but hey, you know you're going to be fine. You know there's highways along the way, there's food. Abram's leaving everything behind. And God didn't even say where to go. At the point of this command in verses 1 to 3, God didn't even actually promise to give Abram the land yet. But Abram obeyed. And so the second thing that I want us to remember is that God's invitation to join him often requires more faith rather than clarity. Abram didn't know exactly what God was going to do or why God needed him to leave, but he trusted God. And do you realize, though, that Abram's willingness to obey, his willingness to go from into an unknown land, gets more praise in Hebrews chapter 11, which can be sometimes called like the Hall of Faith. It gets more praise there than any of the other stuff that Abram ever actually did. What he accomplished in the land was of less significance than the faith he showed. Look at Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 and 9. By faith, Abram obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. So if Abram had waited around for God to clarify and explain why he ought to leave, we wouldn't have Hebrews 11, 8, and 9 here. We wouldn't have seen the faith that God delighted in and that God loved. It's only after Abram obeys that God gives more clarity. But let me encourage you with this reminder that God takes great delight in your faith. He loves it. It's precious to him. So in those times when things seem unclear, don't give up. Don't give up. But why is God sending Abram out? He did give him a reason for the trip. It's verses 2 and 3. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So as soon as God called Abram away from his family, his kindred, his nation, God said he was going to bless Abram. He was going to turn this childless old man into a great nation, give him children and grandchildren. He promised to give him a great name, to give him fame. And by verse 7, God also promises land for him as well. But why was he doing this? He was doing it so that he could bless the whole world through Abram. And that's the third thing I want us to remember this morning. That God's blessings in my life are meant for the world. Abram was going to receive children, he was going to receive land, he was going to receive prestige and God's good pleasure. But through Abram's family, God eventually sent the rescuer to save all of us. And it's easy to say that God's blessings aren't just meant for us to enjoy, but that they're meant for the world. And, it's the kind of thing, that a message that we've heard throughout our lives, perhaps. But it's not a very easy thing to live out. Bill Borden was born on the 1st of November, 1887. His father had become a millionaire in silver mines in the U.S. His mother attended a Christian evangelistic crusade and became a believer when Bill was about 6 or 7 years old. And so his mother Bill's mother took him to church, and he grew up to understand God and know God. When he finished high school, being from a very wealthy family, Bill took an around-the-world tour with his friend. And as he traveled around the world, God touched Bill and gave him a deep heart to share Christ cross-culturally. And he was especially burdened for the Uyghur people of northwest China, an Islamic people group. Well, Bill was a very successful student. He went on to graduate from Yale and Princeton. And while he was studying there, he used his great wealth to start homeless shelters, and he volunteered his own time working in them. He also started prayer meetings on campus. At first, it was just a few friends who joined him to pray once a week. By the end of his time, I think this was at Yale, might have been at Princeton, of the 1,300 students on campus, 1,000 of them were joining him in prayer every week. And so even during his university days, it was clear that God was using Bill to bless the people around him and to spread his glory. And Bill was a very faithful to God. When he finished his studies, he served on the North American Council of what was then called the China Inland Mission, now OMF. Later, when he was in his early 20s, he left the U.S. and headed off to serve in mission. His goal was to reach the Uyghurs in northwest China. He lived in Chicago. The Chicago Daily Tribune, on the day that he left, ran this headline up there in the top left: "Young millionaire renounces world to be missionary." So Bill Borden understood that the blessings God had given him were not meant for him to enjoy a cushy life. They weren't meant for him to enjoy the benefits of his great education and the jobs that he could get. Bill understood, and he was willing to give it all up all his wealth, his comfortable lifestyle, his name, his recognition, in order to join what God was doing in blessing the world. Well, what about you? How has God blessed you? What blessings has he put in your life? Is it finances? Is it professional skills? Is it a good name? A healthy family? How might God want to use those blessings to bless the rest of the world as well? Yeah. Well, let's return to Abram. So Abram heads out in faith. Okay, he heads out in faith. Good, there we go. And I put up this in Google Maps just to reinforce, sometimes we hear, okay, Shechem, Hebron, where are these places? These are real places. So this is Google Maps today. He heads out in faith, and he trusts God to provide him, to bless him and to bless the whole world through him. In verse 7, Abram is at the Oak of Morah. And if you go there today, this is where Abram built an altar to the Lord. If you go there today, you'll be pretty close to Pet Glory, pet supply store there in the blue, very close to that. And this is where God added to his promise to Abram that God would give this land to him. Well, Abram leaves Pet Glory, and he heads down to an area between Bethel and Ai, and that's where he builds an altar to the Lord. And that altar today is now Pizza Express, right there in the middle. Yeah, you got to wonder, like, anyway, it is Pizza Express. That's right where he was. And from there, he then heads down to the Negeb in southern Israel. Excuse me. Later in verses 10 through 20, which we didn't read, he heads down to Egypt as well, interacts with the pharaohs. So we see Abram just kind of wandering around this land. And as I looked at that, I started wondering, God, why did you just have him wandering around? Surely, if what you wanted to do was to establish a great nation through him and bless the world, why not just tell him where to go, send him there, and tell him to have kids? But God didn't do that. God let him kind of wander around. And so the fourth thing that I want us to remember this morning is that God is, well, yeah, not that one. God is interested in more than just the mission that we see in front of us. As I was preparing for this, Melinda and I have, if you've tracked us, it seems like we've been all over the place. We're now living in, I think, the 6th or 7th country in our marriage. And sometimes it's like, God, what are you doing? Just tell us where to go. And we'll just settle there. But this is a pattern for God. God was taking Abram on a journey. And on that journey, he was helping Abram know himself, helping him know God better. And on the journey, he would interact with pharaohs, with kings, with warlords, with shepherds. And as Abram came to know God, those people came to know God as well. Abram saw God protect his wife Sarah when he was in Egypt, and the Pharaoh wanted to take Sarah as his wife. And Abram would have seen that God ruled even in places where it seemed the Pharaoh was ruling. God was the real ruler. He saw God miraculously provide a son for him. And he would have learnt that God keeps his promises. At one point, he experienced God making a very one-sided covenant of just an unconditional promise to Abram. He would have experienced God's generosity in giving good things, even when Abram failed. Well, Bill Borden, his eventual plan was to serve among the Uyghurs in northwest China. So he decided he would start out by going to Cairo, Egypt, to learn Arabic. And even there in Cairo, he was reaching out. He was sharing Christ on the streets and trying to be faithful. Just a few months after he arrived in Cairo, he contracted cerebral meningitis. Less than 3 weeks later, at just 25 years old, Bill Borden passed away. His grave marker there in Cairo includes the words, "A man in Christ. He arose and forsook all and followed him. Apart from faith in Christ, there is no explanation for such a life." Why would God take the life of a man who had so much promise? He had everything going for him. He had wealth. He could fund these trips. He had an incredible heart for God. He had faith in God. Why would God take that man's life? If God had burdened Bill for the Uyghur people, why did he take his life before he even reached the Uyghurs? Why didn't he let Bill spend a long life serving among them and being faithful to share Christ among them, just as he had been faithful sharing Christ at Princeton, at Yale, in Cairo, everywhere he had been? Well, likewise, Abram never saw the completion of what God had invited him to do. He never saw the great nation. He never saw the land truly being his. He never saw the world being blessed and worshiping. But God was interested in a mission other than the one he had told Abram about. Well, I want to close this morning with these beautiful words from Hebrews. And these words speak of Abram's faith to follow God and to leave behind all that he had. And they also speak of God's delight in his children who trust him. And I want these words to echo with us as we leave here today. A reminder of how God delights in faith when we follow him as well. So Hebrews 11, verses 13 to 16. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Yeah, God is not ashamed to be called your God.